Hello and welcome to Crypto and Policy, our bi-weekly live show that explores everything related to regulation and crypto right here in the United States and beyond. I'm Jen Sanasie here with my co-host, Paul Hastings' partner, Renato Mariotti. Renato, it's so nice to see you.
Great to see you. Glad to be back after a hiatus. Had a big jury trial against the Department of Justice, so that took me out of commission. But I'm back in business. Finally, about to fly home.
Back in business. We are so happy to have you back. And what timing, the last show that we are doing live on CoinDesk's socials before the election here in the US. Renato, I got to ask you. I mean, I know that you've been following what's going on very, very closely, but like as we head into next week, what are you watching for? How are you feeling?
Wow. I mean, it is one of the most consequential elections in American history. I think it's likely the most consequential of our lifetime. And for the crypto space, for this industry, I can't think of a more consequential election because we've been talking, Jen, for over a variety of episodes about regulation by enforcement. And here we go. Both candidates have said that they are going to support a new regulatory framework for crypto. It's apparent that both of these candidates are going to replace Gary Gensler. There are two different paths, and both of them are different than where we're at right now. It's exciting, and it's really a substantial moment, I would say, for the crypto industry.
It really is an exciting time. Now, we are going to talk to Kyle Bligen. He's the Director of Financial Policy for the Chamber of Progress in just a few moments. But I want to let our audience know that you should stick around after the interview because Renato and I are also going to talk about former FTX executive Nishad Singh's sentencing that came through yesterday and Crypto.com's suit against the SEC. A lot happening when it comes to crypto and policy. I thought maybe we could have a more relaxed end of the year, but it doesn't feel like that's going to happen, Renato.
Not at all. Not at all. There's a lot of action. We actually had to cull the topics to get to those two. There's a lot going on right now.
I know. All right. Well, let's get to our interview now. I want to remind our audience that we are live across all of CoinDesk's social channels. So if you have a question or a comment you'd like to share with us, you can put that below this video and we will try to get through to it during the live stream. Let's welcome our guest now, Chamber of Progress Director of Financial Policy, Kyle Bligen. Kyle, welcome.
Greetings, greetings. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Of course, thank you for joining us. I just asked Renato what he's watching, how he's feeling as we head into next week. I pose the same question to you, Kyle. What are you watching? How are you feeling? How are you preparing for this monumental election?
Well, I would say generally for the industry, I'm excited. We were talking before the show, and I mentioned where I think both candidates ranked and how they are going to regulate the industry. And I'll say again, I think that for the candidates, Harris is probably the floor for the industry, and former President Trump is probably the ceiling. But Vice President Harris's floor is significantly higher than President Biden's ceiling. And so I think if you're pro digital assets and you're looking to see how in the future and how this industry is going to be regulated, either side, both candidates probably are offering some promise that you were not able to find under this current administration.
Yeah, I think, Kyle, it's really a choice between change or change for the industry, right?
That's right.
Some really good news on both sides. Of course, one thing that I think it's fair to say is that both candidates have offered a lack of specifics, right? There's some great gestures. Obviously, Trump has appeared at various events. Create crypto for Harris. There's obviously some great statements that Chuck Schumer made at an event there that were, I think, very well received about the passage of a regulatory framework. Is there anything that you can see that I haven't, maybe that's a specific that we can hang our hats on regarding a potential regulatory framework?
Sure. Well, I think, and I can go through what I know both candidates have said about specific policies. So we know for former President Trump, he has stated that one, obviously wants to replace SEC Chair Gensler, that he wants to create a cryptocurrency advisory council within the White House. He also posited that he wants the federal government to increase its holdings of Bitcoin in the future. And he also wants to block the Federal Reserve from being able to create and issue its own digital currency or CBDC. For Vice President Kamala Harris, she has stated previously that she wants to support the innovation development of burgeoning technologies like artificial intelligence and digital assets, while at the same time, she noted that she wants to support a regulatory framework that protects consumers. I think at an event that she was speaking out, talking about her agenda for Black men. And so I think we see more of maybe a consumer focus initially from Vice President Harris's remarks, while former President Trump's remarks were being issued to the industry as a whole.
I mean, I'm sorry, Jim, but I was going to say, since the passage requires 60 votes in the Senate, and there's not going to be 60 votes on either side, and it seems like the Democrats actually are the ones that are more reluctant to support this, and on legislative side, is it possible that Harris might actually be able to get a deal done more easily than former President Trump, given the Democrats' opinion of him?
Well, according to the current polling, it seems like the House is predicted to flip Democrat and the Senate is going to flip R. The current financial services chair who potentially will be the financial services chair, and on the Democratic side will be Chairwoman Maxine Waters. And she, on the record in the past, has been very, very skeptical and antagonistic to the industry as a whole. I do think you're going to see her position be balanced out there from a leadership perspective, because if Vice President Harris becomes President Harris and she has a pro-crypto regulatory framework she's trying to push, Democrats in the House have to work with her in order to get that done. You're correct to point out that historically, Republicans have been better on the issue of cryptocurrency and pro-crypto regulation than the Democrats have. I mean, we've seen a significant, though, breaking of the water with the landmark vote for Fit 21. We saw 71 Democrats join their Republican colleagues in the House, and now we're still having conversations about whether or not bipartisan cryptocurrency legislation can be included in the end of the year omnibus bill. And so no matter who wins, the future for crypto needs to be bipartisan, because the technology in and of itself is not partisan.
I agree with that.
Let's dive a little bit into what that future could look like, starting with Harris. If Harris does win the presidency next week, what do you expect to see, Kyle, in January when it comes to regulation in the United States? How might things move along? What might that future look like?
Well, I would hope, based on her previous statements, that she would stay true to what she said in the campaign trail, which is that she wants to support a comprehensive regulatory framework that will protect consumers. Right? Too often, the detractors of cryptocurrency as a technology and blockchain technology as a whole have pointed to one-off frauds and bad actors in the space to discredit the entire technology. I would assume that under a Harris regime, we would see an administration that seek to bolster consumer protections for everyday users. Now that we know there's ranges between 20 to 50 million Americans that have either bought or sold cryptocurrency, they still need the stock consumer protections that traders or regular securities have. And so you want crypto to be developed in the United States, but the consumers need to also be protected in the United States.
And if we take a look at the other side now, if Trump wins next week, what do you expect to see? I know some analysts I've spoken to said we might see some movement on crypto regulation that's a little bit more progressive, faster. What's your view there?
I think that's fair. I mean, it seems as if the Trump campaign has definitely communicated to the industry that they would probably cease regulation by enforcement that currently SEC Chair Gensler has pursued. And you're probably going to see a decrease in the amount of arbitrary lawsuits and cases that the SEC is engaging in, all the way from regular exchanges to decentralized finance to now, in recent case filings where we're recognizing the SEC is going after folks that are issuing NFTs. All right, so I'm assuming if former President Trump becomes president, we're going to see a cease to that.
It's interesting. I agree with you. I think there's going to be less enforcement in the Trump administration, although I'm skeptical that Donald Trump and Maxine Waters are going to come together to cut a deal. That doesn't seem to me like former President Trump's strength, is reaching across the aisle to Democrats. I do wonder, though, what regulatory agency you believe will ultimately regulate this space? There's a lot of excitement in the industry to have the CFTC take a leading role. Do you believe the CFTC will ultimately be the agency that regulates the space, or will there be a shared responsibility with the SEC, or potentially the SEC taking a larger role?
To be honest with you, I think the answer is that I do not know. Both agencies need additional support as it pertains to staffing, and there needs to be regulatory clarity, probably produced through comprehensive bipartisan legislation as to what the role of the SEC is and what the CFTC is. We still need a strong definition of what is a digital, of the breakdown of digital assets. What's a security? What's a commodity as it pertains to digital assets? And then we need to have a conversation of, okay, well, then how are we going to divvy up enforcement capabilities between the two if we're having a conversation about a joint regulatory regime, about what agency is responsible for what, and then do those agencies, now that we have given them the express mandate to regulate digital assets, do they have the enforcement capabilities and the capacity to oversee this amazing flourishing new financial market? I think that is still to be seen, but I'll tell you, proponents of the industry that are seeking a market clarity and consumer protections, they're hoping that whatever happens, it still happens with bipartisan support.
Come January, how quickly do you think we could see a new SEC chair, and what would have to happen in the scenario that you present for a new chair to take the helm?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the SEC is an independent regulatory agency. And so Gensler still has time left on his term. But if he follows traditional precedent, if there is a new president and they have a desire to bring in a new SEC chair, Gensler should probably submit his resignation and step down. Hopefully, that happens in the normal course of the rest of the appointments that each president is entitled to supporting and propping up. Hopefully, in the first couple of quarters, to be honest with you, I think if you ask anybody in the industry, it's all the best time to start in the future is now. And so whoever is elected and ultimately sworn in, hopefully they can get a new chair in there relatively soon.
I'm curious, Kyle, who do you think are leading candidates to potentially be SEC chair? Do you have any predictions of who is going to potentially replace Chairman Gensler?
I'm not a betting man. I honestly do not know. I know that both campaigns internally do have short lists, but I don't think I'm privy to have that conversation on the air right now.
Now,
Fair enough.
the conversations we have on the show, I mean, ahead of the US election, are very US focused. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the global impact the result of this election might have for the industry.
It's a great question. Well, according to a recent report by Electric Capital, it seems as if the future of cryptocurrency development um, and for innovators seems to be in Asia. Asia is increasing in its market share and just sheer amount of folks that are developing new applications for blockchain and crypto. And the US share has been decreasing at a very rapid rate. And if you ask a significant amount of developers who've been cited on various reports and other interviews, they cite the lack of regulatory clarity and it seems a hostile enforcement regime in the SEC. And so, if the United States wants to make sure that this innovation, this technological drive is continued to happen for American consumers with consumer protections, strong market regulations that are going to allow for capital formation and for this new technology to thrive in the United States, we have to have a more comprehensive and clear bipartisan regulatory regime. That's going to be a stark contrast of what consumers and innovators and builders are faced with today with the SEC.
Yeah, really what I've been hearing a lot from clients is that it's starting to look increasingly overseas. And Europe, by the way, is actually ahead of the United States in this regard. Europe is ultimately, has a framework out there, and a lot of companies are looking to the European market. Continental Europe is a potential a place to move their investment. It's really unfortunate for the United States, and I think that I would say the only upside that comes for you from the U.S. perspective is that hopefully the U.S. government can pick and choose from the parts of these regulations that all these other countries have done first and find the best pieces to put together something that makes sense over here.
I agree. I mean, I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. Our G7 and G20 partners already have regimes in place that are still protecting consumers, and obviously they're allowing for innovation to thrive because we're seeing this massive flight of developers from the United States elsewhere in the world. But I'm pro U.S. I think the best place to do business in the world is the United States of America. We want that innovation, we want that technological drive to happen here at home, so that our consumers can thrive, can benefit from the technology under strong rules of the road.
Renato, I want to ask you, you and I have spoken about this before. In certain cases, you've advised clients to build elsewhere, depending on the project that they're building here in the United States. How are you advising clients in this term while we wait to see who the next president of the United States is going to be?
It's a nice bridge into a discussion we're going to have later, because one thing that I have tried to do for clients is help them understand how the election creates opportunity and risk for them. For in this space, there's a lot of opportunity because now there was I think by an effort by some clients to potentially delay or play things out, or I would say delays is maybe that's the right word, but not speed things up. Let's put it that way, in the hopes that there could be change in the future. But change appears to be on the horizon. It's like an exciting thing, and it means that companies that were focused on making an investment might want to wait and see if there's a turn in the U.S.'s favor, so they don't have to expend resources trying to build infrastructure overseas.
Kyle, before we start to wrap up our conversation here, I got to ask you, we've asked a guest on this show this question previously, but I think it's pertinent as we head into next week. Do you really think that crypto could swing this election? Are there that many single issue voters out there who are looking at crypto, who are looking at what the candidates are saying about crypto and are basing their decision solely on that?
Yeah, so Paradigm just came out with a recent poll. Um, Out of they said that what 20% of Americans have bought or sold crypto, and they said 5% of that 20%, so have decided that crypto has made them a single issue voter. Now, if we're looking at how tightly contested this election is, 5% to either candidates that's a significant amount. If we're looking at these very, very close margins, according to the polling, for individuals that hold crypto and are likely voters, they are obviously preferring to vote for, according to the data, former President Trump. So I think there are numbers, and the data supports that voters that care about the future of this industry, they're going to be voting. They are voting. They already probably have voted, and we're going to see. We'll probably hear from some of those voters and why they voted that way after the election has been shaken out, and we find out who's going to ultimately be the next president of the United States.
Kyle, I love that you came with the data and the facts. You had a fact for us. Every question we threw at you. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I know it's going to be a busy weekend for you, as it will for most Americans who are heading to the polls. So thank you for coming and unpacking this and helping us get the information out there as Americans go to the polls to vote for the next president.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Awesome. That was the Chamber of Progress Director of Financial Policy, Kyle Bligen. All right. Now, I want to remind everyone who's watching the show, we are live across CoinDesk's socials. We can see your questions. We can see your comments. So please write them below this video. We will try to get to them. Don't troll us. I mean, you can troll us, but if you do, we're probably not going to respond. I don't know. Maybe Renato's feeling a little bit spicy. He may or may not. But ask your questions about regulation and policy, and we will try to get to them. Now, let's talk about something that I love talking about. And Renato, I think you love talking about it too, because it's something we cover at every single development, or we have covered at every single development through this journey. And that is the FTX journey. Yesterday, we learned that former FTX engineering head Nishad Singh was sentenced after pleading guilty to 6 criminal charges early last year. He received no prison time. So he was sentenced to time served and 3 years of supervised Release. The judge said that his cooperation with the government was remarkable and that he was persuaded that Singh's involvement with the fraud was more limited than Sam Bankman-Fried's and Caroline Ellison's. Renato, just want to get your initial reactions on this. I believe this is the first FTX executive we've seen that has not received any prison time. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a remarkable result, Jen. Absolutely remarkable. I do this for a living, as you know, very much so on my day-to-day life. Very, very a great result for him. And I think when you look at the judge's comments at the sentencing, what it really comes down to was he was not very involved in FTX. And when the defendant got involved, he got involved for like a few months, realized there was a problem, and then started basically flipping and helping the government. And so the judge made, I thought, Judge Kaplan made a rather remarkable statement. He said in his mind, he said, not speaking as a legal matter, but I don't think he did anything wrong, which is really remarkable for a judge at a criminal sentencing to say that. And I think the judge's view was, okay, you maybe went along with this for a little while because you didn't really know, but once you caught on, which didn't take long, a few months, you immediately went did the right thing and told the authorities. And from the judge's perspective, I think he felt like this man had suffered enough, which is something, and it's very different, obviously, than SBF and his former girlfriend.
Well, Judge Kaplan really was a no-nonsense judge and has shown to be a no-nonsense judge throughout the sentencings, throughout SBF's trial at least. And so I was quite surprised to see this. It felt like we were hearing a little bit of a softer side from him, which we didn't really get in any other instance of the FTX trial.
Yeah, and a judge is supposed to be taking into account all of the facts and circumstances surrounding the case, including all of the history and characteristics of the defendant. I'm literally quoting to you what the statute says the judge needs to look at. And yet, for, let's say, Caroline Ellison, he didn't focus as much on her personal qualities or on her history. I think that her lawyers wanted that to be the case, but the judge was convinced that she was knees deep in this misconduct and this criminal activity. And obviously, the judge had no patience for SBF, who had violated his conditions of bond, and the judge felt that he was falsely testified in the witness stand and so on. This person is really different, and I really think what he does is he actually sets a nice template for people in this space who are concerned about potential regulatory activity, or in this case, a criminal prosecution. If you think there's something fishy going on at your company, getting a lawyer right away and getting advice about what to do very quickly can potentially lead to a much better result. And so this is, I think, proof positive in that.
I think that's great advice. And sometimes people need that reminder. Don't do bad things.
Don't do questionable things. I mean, in this space, it's sometimes hard to know what's bad or not, or what's really a problem. And so it's a good thing that he got help right away.
That's true. Now, I want to talk about the supervised release. Like, how will this sentence function in reality? Will there be limitations or requirements that he's likely to encounter?
Yes. So when you're on supervised release, you're like reporting to somebody who has various conditions that they, when you're traveling, or there's certain things you can't do and you have to report in every once in a while. But it's not that onerous. It's essentially you're living your life, but you report in every week or two about what you're doing. It's not so bad. It's certainly not better than federal prison. And so it is, as punishments go, this is about as light as it comes. And usually, if you do go to prison and have a prison sentence, there's a tack on of a term of supervised release at the end anyway.
Okay. And I want to tie this back to the conversation we were just having with Kyle, hoping to get some regulatory clarity in the United States in January. Do you think that this trial, FTX, is going to come up in January as the US is trying to figure out how to regulate this space, or is this something that is in the industry's past?
It's a great question. I think, by the way, this sentencing is we're getting to the point where we're closing a chapter here, and it's very important for the industry, because up until the FTX debacle, it really looked like we were on a path to regulatory framework. It really looked like the industry had positioned itself quite well. vis-a-vis lawmakers, and everything changed after the FTX debacle, the bankruptcy, the indictment, and so on. It's really important for us to move past it. And just when Kyle was talking to us a minute ago, he said the industry is getting blamed for the results of like bad actors, right? Like one-off bad actors, and that's true. You can use all sorts of innocuous tools to commit crimes, right? People use all sorts of things to commit crimes. That doesn't mean we don't use banks or we don't use, credit cards or all sorts of other important tools, just because there's somebody who uses those tools to commit a crime.
I got to ask you, these FTX executives that are getting sentenced that we talk about on this show often, will they be allowed to work in crypto once they're done serving their sentences? Will they be allowed to work in financial services?
Yeah, that's not something that could be generally is not a permanent condition. It's something that's during a period of supervised release, but it's very difficult as a practical matter. In other words, you may have the freedom to do something, whether you have the ability, it's a different story, right? How many companies in the space want to employ Sam Bankman-Fried or Caroline Ellison or even this gentleman? It's hard. It creates a lot of context. I've had a lot of clients who've had regulatory issues, and then an enforcement matter, let's say, against them, and then it's hard to convince the next employer that they're okay because it's a black stain when you Google their names.
Yeah, I bet. Well, we will continue to follow developments and FTX as this chapter comes to a close. But let's move on to our next topic now. Another topic we love to cover on this show, Renato, the SEC. We learned recently that Crypto.com sued the SEC, seeking declaratory and injunctive relief to prevent the SEC from unlawfully expanding its jurisdiction to cover secondary market sales of certain tokens. Now, Renato, I'm going to pass the baton over to you here to talk to us about why this is such a big story and why this could have a large impact on the crypto industry.
Well, certainly very interesting and important development, I think, Jen. I think Coinbase, Crypto.com, and others are I would say they're leaders in the space, okay? For better or for worse, they are name brands that people think about when they think of crypto. And in the case of Coinbase, there was a real high profile suit but it was initiated by the SEC. Coinbase was sued by the SEC. They've appropriately responded to that. I think they messaged to the public, and I think in a very helpful way to help put that into context. But ultimately, the SEC selected the venue, New York. The SEC told its story in the complaint, in other words, framed the issues the way they wanted to, and the SEC controlled the timing on that. And the playbook has been, Jen, and this is why it really feeds into our prior conversation with Kyle. The playbook had been for people in this space is let's try to hold off as best we can. Hope the SEC waits to sue us because maybe Gensler won't be there anymore. Maybe we'll have a new president. Maybe things will change. Just like hold and survive. Survive regulation by enforcement as best you can. Hide under a rock. And what Crypto.com did is they took an aggressive step. They went to court themselves. They set up their shop in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals territory, very favorable for the industry, very not favorable for the SEC. In the Eastern District of Texas, a very favorable court location for them. And they filed suit first. They framed the facts, they framed the issues. And I think, Jen, one of the reasons that they felt good about doing that is because they know that by the time this lawsuit gets anywhere for real, there will be a new chair, there will be a new regulatory framework in place, and so perhaps they're better off, setting the agenda and framing the story for themselves.
I want to touch on something else I thought was interesting. They hired a former solicitor general to represent them. Talk to me about the significance of this. It really feels like, they were preparing for this to almost go to war on behalf of the industry with the SEC.
It's very interesting. And it's an interesting choice from another perspective, Jen, which is a lot of times when you're facing an action against the SEC, you choose somebody like myself who's been a trial lawyer, who has gone out, had a lot of matters against the SEC, against the CFTC, and so on. In fact, that's what Coinbase did in the New York matter that they have. They hired folks who are experienced, former head of enforcement at the SEC, the former head of enforcement at the CFTC, and so on. And Crypto.com went a different route. A solicitor general is someone who argues in the Supreme Court. They're appellate lawyers. They're like more like the book lawyers. They're not like lawyers who go to trial and get hard and scrappy. They're the one lawyers who are like brainiacs. And I think what they're signaling here, this is what the signals by Crypto.com is, they think this is ultimately going to be decided in that Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and in the United States Supreme Court. And they want to position this case to be the one to do it. And so they've hired the former Solicitor General to make that argument before potentially the United States Supreme Court. So it could be a very important decision.
Well, tie this up for us. Take us home. What kind of impact can this have on the industry? And from where we are sitting today, how might this play out over the next year?
Well, first of all, I think at some point in time, Jen, crypto law and policy won't just be the name of this series that we have, but it's going to be some textbook somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Or a book. And when people write the history of this industry from a regulatory perspective, the first chapter is going to be about what we're discussing, the creation of a regulatory framework, these initial landmark decisions by the courts of appeals in the United States Supreme Court. So whether it's crypto.com versus the SEC, or whether it is the passage of a new legislative framework, whether it's from President Harris or Trump, either one, that'll be a starting point in that chapter. And so I think we have really we've got a really exciting set of episodes coming up in the next few months. And everybody really needs to keep viewing and let people know, because we're going to have a lot to discuss. We're going to have a new president, one way or the other. We're going to have a new regulatory framework, one way or the other. We're going to have a new SEC chair, one way or the other. And we're going to have all of these lawsuits playing out at the same time. It's going to be a really interesting time to be watching this space.
Renato, I'm so happy you brought that up. It's hard to remember that we are living through this incredibly pivotal time for this industry, right? A lot of the things we are talking about are contributing to this like foundational infrastructure that the industry will be built on. And it's such an honor to be a part of that and have these discussions with you.
I think it's so exciting. I'm excited to be a part of it. It's why I've gotten involved in this, because I feel like I'm witnessing history. It's an exciting thing to witness.
Well, that's the end of our show today, but we are here every second week discussing everything crypto and policy. The next time we come back, we are going to have so much more information. We're going to know who the next president of the United States is going to be. And you won't want to miss that show. The shows, like Renato said, coming out of this space next year are going to be amazing. I mean, I feel like we've been in this holding pattern, and I feel like we're about to like skyrocket off, and I don't know. I just feel like the industry is in this incredible growth phase. So please continue watching. Please continue coming and joining in this conversation. It is such a pleasure to have this conversation with you every other week right here on CoinDesk's social platforms. We will see you in 2 weeks from now. I'm Jen Sanasie.